I'm Donna Thistlethwaite. I am a sessional lecturer here at QT and an associate of the Careers and Employment team. Tonight we're going to be getting into a little bit more depth around your will unit and also your the star L as well. We talked about it a little bit in the lecture 1, and we're going to be getting into it in a bit more depth today because we really want you to understand this. It's a key part of your first assessment. So let's get started. We thought it might be useful for you to have some feedback on what's gone well and how students have fared in past assessments. So although the very last cohort did do very, very well, there are some things that you might need to think about moving forward. So in the past, some students haven't used the star L format particularly well. It is a very critical part of the assessment, and it's actually going to be really useful for you moving forward in your careers as well. Many students showed quite limited depth in their critical thinking and their identification of the learning outcomes. So in some instances, the reflections were overly focused on the work that was done, and very little of it was focused on what they actually learned from the experiences, which is a really critical part of the process, the experience, and then of course the assessment as well. So when you're choosing your will experience, think about the activities, tasks, events that can be well discussed and that make sense from a learning perspective. You shouldn't actually be thinking about writing about what's going to be simple, because it's probably not what you're going to get the most from this experience for. So it can include either positive or negative experience. Sometimes our best learning can come from the most challenging circumstances that we've had. The learnt section is absolutely critical to this. So ideally you want to write about a key skill or lesson that you learnt from the experience, but you might also mention other skills that you developed as part of that event or experience. Developing your learning objectives from your will placement is a really key part of this process. So research the skills that you require for your future profession. You might link in with the standards made available by your professional association if they have them. You might even look at things like Seek and LinkedIn for sources of information about skills that you will require. And what you want to do is identify the skills or experiences that you would like to focus on throughout your will placement. The spiderweb diagrams that we will talk more about in the future should ideally be linked to the skills that you're identifying as part of this process. When coming up with your learning objectives, have a think about what it is that you really enjoy. Think about the types of environments that you like to work in, maybe your values and other inputs that can help you to formulate the type of work that you would like to be doing in the future and the skill set that you feel that you would need to develop in order to do that very well. When you describe your learning objectives, they will be what helps you to achieve the future career ambitions that you have. And you'll want to describe how these work activities and your learning objectives and responsibilities link in with the learning outcomes for this unit. In preparing for your star Ls, we thought it might be helpful to think about the reflective process and the languages that you might use, or the language you might use around this. So the 4R model is really useful in this regard. In the STAR component of your examples, you'll be using the reporting and responding component of those 4Rs. And then in the learnt section, this is where you're really getting into your reflection. And you'll be doing your relating, your reasoning, and your reconstructing as well. What might you do different in the future? I wanted to provide you with a little bit more detail, guiding you through that STAR L process. So in the situation, you want to describe the environment, the type of people, the equipment you're using, and it's to give the reader some background information and puts it into a context for them. Okay, and as I said, it's the reporting and responding component of the 4R model. And the deeper reflection, you want to report what happened or what the issue or incident involved, why it's relevant, and report why the incident, and respond to the incident or issue by making observations and expressing your opinion or asking questions. When it comes to the task, what was it that you had to do? How did you interact with others? How might you deal with this task? How did you deal with this task? And finally, the result, or not finally, and in the results section, how did your actions resolve the task? Did your actions cause any issues? How and why? What needs further investigation? Finally, the learning component. So you want to highlight the skills that came out of the process and how they can be applied elsewhere, or plan to explore a topic further, develop further skills by undertaking targeted activities or by studying a particular course or unit. So what are you going to do further in terms of developing this skill? So you're going to be tapping into the relating and the reasoning and reconstruction components. So relate or make a connection between the incident or issue and your own skills, your professional experience or your discipline knowledge. Have you seen this before? What were the conditions? Were the conditions same or different that last time? Do you have the skills or knowledge to deal with this situation? And offer an explanation on that. In terms of the reasoning, highlight in detail the significant factors that underlie the incident or issue. Explain and show why they were important to an understanding of the incident or issue. Refer to relevant theory and literature to support your reasoning. Consider different perspectives. How would a knowledgeable person perceive or handle this? What are the ethics that are involved in this issue? Finally, reconstructing, how might you do this differently? So reframe or reconstruct future practice or professional understanding. How would you deal with it next time? What might work and why? Are there different options? What would happen if, are my ideas supported by theory? And can I make changes to benefit others? In preparing your STAR Ls, it can sometimes be challenging to think of the right sort of language to use. And what we've tried to do is identify some really valuable reflective language to expand your vocab on this. So there is a resource that sits in Blackboard, but what you'll see on this slide are a range of sentences, ways to shape your language as you discuss your learning experiences and go through that reflective process. So I'm not going to read this out word for word, but there's some great little sort of sentence starters, sentence structures there that will be very helpful for you. Okay, this is a really nice slide for just getting back to that basics of what it is that your STAR examples are going to look like. So it might seem that we're potentially being a little bit repetitive here, but the point is this is a very critical process, and it's one that can actually be really difficult when you're first starting out. It's like other skills that you'll develop. You've got your training wheels on at first, and you're quite, you're sort of that you'll start being quite, you won't be competent, and then you'll be moving to that stage of being consciously competent, where you've got this structure, you can work through it yourself, but it's still something that you need to think through and be conscious of. And I can assure you, as you master this skill, which will come by practice, you will move to that stage where you can write these really well, and it's going to be perfect timing because it's going to be just as you're about to go out into the next stage of your career, and you'll have mastered them in order to perform really well in your career management. So the situation. So what did the experience? Where did the experience occur? What was the environment? Who were the people involved? The task. What was required of you? This could be a technical performance. It could be a project. It could be dealing with a particular problem that you faced. So basically, what were you tasked with doing in this overall situation? So what actions did you take to deliver the task, resolve the problem, or present a case? So what were the different steps that you took, and what was the result? So the outcome, and how did your actions affect the result that was achieved? Finally, the learning, and as you can see, there's quite a few points there, and that's indicative of its importance in this process. So what did you learn from the process? How would you apply what you've learnt to other tasks? And show evidence of the application of your skills and how this experience contributed to your personal and professional development. We'd like to spend some time now doing an activity around a star L, and this is a context that you will all be very, very familiar with. I want you to reflect on a group assignment. Perhaps you weren't able to choose the group that you had. Maybe they were nominated by the course convener or the lecturer, and the people from, say, different cultures. Maybe they were actually from different disciplinary areas, as often happens. So, have a think about, was this something that you did really well at? Did you smash the assignment, or did you bomb out? Because either of those scenarios are going to give you great learning experiences to reflect upon. So please spend a little time now writing out your own example. We will provide feedback keep posting yours online as we chat, but I'd like to introduce Madeline.
Hi.
Madeline is a work placement student currently working with me in my business Career Vitality, and Madeline's a career development student. So Madeline has kindly done that little activity and is going to share that with us. So talk us through it. Madeline.
Okay, so I've done mine on a group assignment as well, like what you have just done, and it's for an online course. So in my situation, it was a group assignment for an online course consisting of 4 group members, and the groups were assigned by the course convener. So we were emailed to tell us who were in our group and all their contact details. So the task was that each group member was to complete the assigned tasks in the module, and it was based to see whether or not we were competent in a set of competencies outlined by the Career Development Association.
Okay, so you were assessed as a group?
Yeah. So we all had to complete certain tasks. So one of us had to complete a pre-assessment and post-assessment in that one particular competency.
Yeah.
So the pre-assessment was just based off our knowledge that we had before we completed any coursework, and then the post-assessment was based off once we finished the coursework.
And was that your task?
So I did that for one. So there was, I think, about 4, competencies that we all had to do.
Yep.
So one person had to do that for one, another person had to do like a share a resource. So that could be just like a journal article, a different textbook or something like that.
Yeah.
Someone else had to do a peer review, so we had to communicate with someone either via the phone was the preferred method, and we had to talk about the competency that they had written about.
Okay.
And then there was also another one where we had to do a practical activity. So that could be, there were some people kind of working in the field already, so they could talk about their experiences there, or different role plays or something similar.
Okay.
Yes, that was mainly the task, was just we needed to complete those sections, and we were all assigned a different part. So the action I've got here was, so I engaged in course readings. I used my knowledge that I had and learnt, things that I learnt from in my undergraduate courses as well. I've also got here that I spoke with fellow group members, so if there was any difficulties I was having, or just needing to talk to someone, so, and for those peer reviews.
Yeah.
So that was done via the phone, via emails, and also via Google Hangouts. And then I also created a Google Doc so that everyone could have access to the assessment, and we could all just contribute straight onto the Google Doc.
Okay, so that were the actions that you took?
Yeah. So then the results. So we successfully completed the assignment with each. Yeah, so we got all the module tasks done, and we got a pretty good mark for that as well.
Great. So was it submitted on time as well?
Yeah, it was submitted on time, but there was a little difficulty, like most group assignments have, where one group member, she just hadn't uploaded the last of her work on the day it was due. So I waited till the afternoon, and then decided, well, it's time's ticking on, so I ended up giving her a text, and also tried calling and sent her an email as well, just to try and see if she could upload it as soon as she could, so that we could make sure it's definitely in on time.
Yeah.
She was very happy and she was very apologetic as well that she hadn't got to it, and she did add her section in so that we were able to submit it on time.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And then I guess, so the learnings that I got out of that was I was able to see that I do have a lot of background knowledge into certain aspects of the career development side of things that I didn't know I had. But actually, when I sat down to do the assignment, I realised, oh, I know this. That was really cool to know. And I was able to effectively communicate with this group member to say, can you please put your things into the Google Docs so we could submit the assignment on time as well.
So it sounds like you were quite persistent with that and had some tenacity and maybe some assertiveness as well.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So were you feeling really comfortable doing that, or?
Not really, no.
But you did it?
Yeah, because I thought, well, if that doesn't get done, then the whole group's going to suffer for that one person, and I didn't think it was fair for us to have to all do her part because we had all done ours. So I just kind of took the initiative. I spoke with another group member first to say, oh, what do you think? Like, am I being a bit pushy? And but it was like 2 o'clock and it still hadn't been done, so it was time that we kind of talked to her.
So you got to practice your assertiveness.
Yes.
Great. So is there anything that you do differently next time that's sort of reconstructing or extending upon the learning?
Yeah. I think what we did differently is, so when I set up the Google Doc, it required our Gmail emails. So that meant that sometimes we were sending emails to our Gmail accounts and sometimes they were being sent to our university emails. So it was kind of difficult. I guess there wasn't just one way that we were communicating with each other.
Right.
So there could sometimes be a bit of delay in getting replies by some group members, and I think it was just mainly due to the fact that we had sent it to a different email address than we had the previous time, so they may not have been checking their Gmail account as regularly as their university one or vice versa.
So it sounds like you're saying it would have been beneficial to use one communication channel.
Yeah, and kind of talk about that at the beginning, like how we're going to actually communicate with each other.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's an excellent example.
Oh, thank you.
Madeline. Well done.
Thank you.
That's great. So there are a few examples that I've come up with that I'm hoping certainly relate to some of your disciplines or work contexts. So the first one is that you've got a supervisor who's asked you to obtain quotes for a piece of equipment that has to be purchased by the end of the month. And this may very well be something that you might face in a placement situation. There was a construction project that I was working on that needed to complete an earth moving activity requiring the purchase of a 20-ton sieve bucket to proceed. So that's the situation, what was required, and the task was that your supervisor asked you to arrange quotations for the equipment which needed to be purchased by the end of the month. So we've got a time frame there and specifically what it was that you were doing in relation to this project. So the actions, and you can think of this in terms of the process, and you can certainly bullet point the various steps that you took. So research suppliers and obtained phone numbers for organisations to contact. Contacted 3 of these suppliers and requested quotations which included both the price and the time to secure the equipment as well. Provided the quotations to your supervisor and discussed the decision criteria. So it might be that you'd actually make a recommendation to this supervisor and you would talk through the various elements of your decision criteria and the recommendation that you've arrived at, and obviously they would have some input to that process as well. So the outcome was that the bucket met budget, so was within the price range for the project, and also that it was delivered on time. So that's our results. In terms of the learning, this is going to be demonstrating your understanding of the purpose of the task, and it was to organise an equipment quotation and how that relates to the overall project. So as I just mentioned, without this piece of equipment, there was an activity in the project that couldn't proceed, which then obviously has a flow on to the rest of the project. So you could talk about how you know from the activities in your course that you've studied at QT, maybe you'd mentioned the unit, that how this related to the equipment and the outcomes for the project. So if you can then support it with some relevant literature, that would be a great idea. So think about the criteria that you use. So it wouldn't have been quite probably just the cheapest. You'd be looking at it in relation to the overall project costs, but perhaps also some other factors such as the time frame and the quality as well. And you might again link that to literature in terms of supporting your decision as well and supporting your learning. So how will this experience inform your future action? For example, having now experienced the recruitment process, you might actually make a suggestion that the organisation consider having a supplier database that can be referred to in the event of future equipment purchases. This can obviously accelerate the time that this process takes in the future. So any efficiencies that you can identify from the experience like an extension of your learning process, and obviously an opportunity for the organisations to do things better in the future. And you know, should this occur in your will placement, this is an information and an approach that an organisation is definitely going to value as well. Think about what soft skills may have been either honed or demonstrated in this example. So you're likely to have been using your communication skills. Perhaps that was your written and verbal communication skills. You know, making that suggestion around the database is an example of your initiative. Problem-solving skills would have come into this. You may have needed to identify processes in the organisation that you would need to follow. You're very likely going to have been using your attention to detail, and that's just a few examples. No competencies happen in isolation, and so thinking about all of the different competencies that you have drawn upon is really, really valuable, because it helps you to be able to communicate these, identify and communicate them for future career management, and for being able to communicate your skills into to future employers, and also in processes like recruitment processes and particularly interviews. So let's look at another STAR example. Say your manager asks you to participate in a team that's going to introduce a new engineering software package. So the situation, the company identified a need to introduce a new engineering software package, and a team of 6 had been identified to plan and execute a live rollout within a tight time frame. So, you know, that gives us a lot of a picture of what's going on here. It's going to be involved working with a team, and there's a deadline. There's going to be a bit of pressure because it's a very tight time frame that you're working within. So the task was that you're responsible for participating in the testing, and also involved in stakeholder communication and the installation of the new software. So the actions that you took, the process was to use your applied knowledge and skills, provide advice to team members on the software functionality, created a test plan, and established set timeframes for the installation. So you've got a plan, and it's communicating what is going to happen when, and you've participated in meetings to plan and undertake the required actions for that live rollout and for the training. And the outcome was that the software was successfully installed within 4 weeks, being the time frame required, and it also met the business requirements. Let's talk about the learning. So the most significant learning in this case might be that you recognise the need for a systematic approach to project tasks, including identifying the impacted stakeholders for communication, and you might link that in with some literature to support it. So one of the stakeholders was omitted from a key meeting, which which meant that you had to actually hold a separate briefing for that member. And this obviously has an impost in time in terms of additional work and also time. And this is a classic example of where things haven't gone to plan, but you have learned from that experience and would do things differently in the future. So the future might be that you develop a comprehensive analysis of the stakeholders and that you would discuss it with other team members, perhaps looking for their input into anything that you might have overlooked in that process. So that gives us a couple of other great examples of STAR experiences, and obviously we've had that earlier one from Madeline to draw upon as well. What we'd like to do now is to give you an open forum to ask any questions that you have about the STAR-L process or about the assessment in general.